So let's call the meeting to order. Laura, can you do the roll call?
I'd be happy to. Commissioner Koch,
Here.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yeah.
Commissioner Sill,
Here.
Vice Chair Ross,
Here.
Chair Breen.
Here. All right. And so I'm going to check and see if there is anyone in the audience. I actually see participants for oral communications to see if there's anyone who would like to speak to something that is not on today's agenda. I don't see anything. And so we will push, no, will we push on? Is that, yes, the opening item, which is for fellow commissioners, an action item. So commissioners should consider language for a motion. This is for 846 Portola Road and the Hanson property. And I believe Dylan is giving the report.
Correct. Shall we begin?
Hold on.
Okay. I'll go ahead and share my screen with everyone. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Yes. Looks good.
Okay. So this item is an architectural and site development review of a new residence and basement. New residence
That
with
doesn't look
basement.
like Hanson.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry about that.
That's
Nothing to see there. I used a template from last time. So anyways, so this is a architectural and site development review for a new residence with basement and associated site improvements. And so just to kind of go over some brief history of the project, this project did go before the ASCC at the January the 27th preliminary conceptual design review meeting, not January the 17th as noted on the staff report. And so some brief changes that were made, as I'll detail in this presentation. The second story was modified to conform to building code with respect to habitable attic space and minimal floor area requirements. There is an attached accessory dwelling unit that is subject to the state law exclusions. So that was added into the scope of work, but it is not part of the action requested at tonight's meeting, as it will be reviewed ministerially through a separate permit as noted in staff's report. The covered terrace adjacent to the garage is now a trellis in consideration of building coverage limits. A covered terrace would cause the residents to exceed allowable building coverage limits, so that was a modification. A bocce ball court that was originally proposed in the front yard area has now been removed. Staff will detail that more in the landscaping plan. And then finally, just the floor area and building coverage proposed limits or proposed numbers were modified to conform to the administrative professional zoning code limitations in terms of percentages to the net gross area. So with that, I just wanted to go ahead and start at the site plan or the vicinity map. So the subject property is within the town's administrative professional zone. It's a 10,290 square foot gross area parcel that is reduced by a 1,897 square foot easement, which gets a net area of 8,393 square feet. Relatively flat with a slope of 2%. Okay. So the AP zone regulates developments by percentages solely. Floor area is limited to 13% of net lot area and building coverage, is limited to 13% of net lot area, and building coverage is limited to 18.8 of net lot area, which acts similarly to impervious surfaces limits in residential zones. So this table indicates that the project conforms to the AP objective development standards. Staff wanted to note that the front yard setback is reduced to 20 feet in accordance with section 18.52.110 of town code. So staff interprets this section to allow for the 30-foot reduction. Typically a 50-foot front setback is required because the neighboring parcel that's in front of the subject parcel is common to the front parcel line of Portola is not a residence, it's a commercial space, it's the Howlett store. And then that the subject property gains access from an individual access way. And the AP zone allows for uses by right similar to the R1 residential zone, which requires 1 acre minimum lot size. And so with that, staff will now turn to the floor plan. And so the project complies with max floor area and building coverage limits. Staff notes that on the building coverage diagram, 171 square feet of the ADU is listed in the summation table. And this number actually accounts for a second level habitable space above the proposed attached ADU. This ADU qualifies for that state exclusion I mentioned from local development standards. And therefore the square footage doesn't count towards the building coverage nor floor area maximums, but that area above that 171 square feet would count. And so that's why that number is noted as ADU on the summation table on the diagram 2 to the left. Okay, and so just going to the table at the bottom left corner. So the floor area proposed is 1,086. The maximum applied to this lot is 1,091. So the project conforms to floor area. And additionally, the building coverage limit is allowed 1,577 with that 1,517 square feet. So the project also conforms to building coverage limits. Okay. And so now just briefly turning to the sections, noting that the project does propose a basement and that second story. And then these are the building elevations. These have relatively stayed the same since the previous conceptual design, with the exception of the changes that were mentioned previously in the beginning of the presentation. Okay. And so moving towards the grading. So this project does trigger ASCC review for the 285 cubic yards of soil movement. That is subject to a site development permit. And of that 285 cubic yards, or of the total 185 cubic yards is anticipated for offhaul. So now turning to the materials and finishes. So the proposed materials and color palette do conform to the town's light reflectivity value regulations. And now turning to the lighting plan. And so the 5 fixtures are proposed, all of which comply with the town's outdoor lighting regulations. And then staff had 2 erratas or 2 corrections to the staff report. The first is that there is a note that there are 5 gooseneck fixtures proposed. In counting the fixtures, it appears that there's only 4 instead of 5, so staff is noting that. And then secondly, that there are 2 fixtures proposed to the left and right of the roll-up garage door. Those fixtures are limited to 1,125 lumens. And so currently each fixture, gooseneck fixture, is listed in the cut sheet as 850 lumens each. So that would exceed the 1125. So ASCC may want to add in addition a condition that limits the fixtures to that 1,125 lumens for 2 fixtures, or limit the quantity to 1 fixture only with the 850. And so now turning to the landscape plan. So as with zoning, or as with the floor area and then the building coverage, the AP zoning district also regulates landscaping as a percentage, with 25% of the front yard and 40% overall of the site is required to be landscaped. As the table notes, this project complies with these percentages and with the town's WELO requirements. The percentage of the maximum allowed water allowance used is 40%, which gives you an average ETAF of 0.22. Staff would like to note that this approval or this action tonight does not cover two items. One, the bocce ball court that is
Can't hear
listed
you,
on the
Dylan.
land.
Sorry, you went quiet then, Dylan.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay, what part did everyone miss?
where you said something about the staff wanted to make a note that.
Okay, so there are two items that are not part of the approval tonight. And the first would be a bocce ball court, which is listed on the landscape plans, but has been subsequently removed from the architectural plans, as sports courts within front yards are not allowed per town code. And secondly, the landscaping plans do note that there is new fencing. However, there are no fencing details. So the fencing is not approved, and it is the project has been conditioned that the only fencing allowed on site is the existing fencing on the easterly property line. And so staff wanted to note that the new fencing is because generally the town discourages fencing within the commercial districts. And so in this instance, it still is a commercial district, although it is a residential use, which is still allowed within the AP zone. So that was just something that staff wanted to clarify in terms of the notations on the landscape plan. Okay. So turning to public comments. Notices were sent out to properties within a 300-foot radius of the subject property on October the 16th. And so no comments were received by staff as of tonight's hearing. We did receive a request to review plans. And the comment that we received from that requestor was an overall statement related to the town's basement policy, not necessarily or specific to the project at hand. But I do believe we're going to read that email into the record. Is that right, Laura?
I believe that resident is on the call, so they would be able
Okay.
to participate in the public comment period.
Great, perfect, thank you. Okay, and so now turning to findings. So this is a new slide to ASCC. We've modified kind of the format of our staff report, and therefore some of the presentation information may look new. And so there is a section of code, section 18.64.060, that has certain findings that need to be made in approval of architectural review. And so this is the list of those findings that needed to be made. And then on the second slide, this is a conformance to the design guidelines. So this is more familiar in the sense of the design guidelines have three main aspects of the project and the underlying criteria guidance for each aspect. And so as I've detailed in my staff's report to the ASCC, staff is confident that the findings within both the zoning code in the previous slide, those findings, and then the design guidelines can be made. Staff would like to note that if the ASCC determines that it cannot make any of these findings, it is permitted to impose additional conditions so that such findings may be met. All right. So in conclusion, staff finds that the project conforms to the town center area plan, which allows for residential uses on the subject property, conforms to the zoning code, and conforms to the design guidelines. Staff also finds that the project is exempt from CEQA analysis. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the architectural review and site development permits subject to the recommended conditions of approval as attachment A of your staff report. And this concludes staff's presentation, and we're available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Are there commissioner questions?
I have a question, yes.
Go ahead.
So I missed the meeting in January where this was presented initially. And I guess I need a clarification. I went through the minutes and I'm unclear on why is it okay to have habitable attic space? That seems like a odd concept to me. I mean, it wasn't long ago that we were fighting with, is it okay to even have storage space if it's under 7 feet high, and now we're to the point where we're putting bathrooms and heating and everything in it. So could I get some explanation from Dylan or Laura in terms of why habitable attic space is acceptable?
Yeah, we went through the exercise of the preliminary review with ASCC to see what ASCC's position was on kind of generally the massing of the building, and the kind of the body of the building, knowing that we had some issues to resolve related to the building code. And so they presented some positions at the first meeting, but we went back and took a look at those, and we brought in our plan check engineer and contract building official to take a look at this. The ASCC asked us to look at the building code issues and ensure that those could be resolved. And so we spent quite a bit of time with those, and the architecture team has looked at the building code, and they do believe that the project is now in compliance with the building code. And so they've created some sloped ceilings in some of the living area in the upstairs, so that only a portion of that area counts as floor area under our zoning code, but it does count as habitable area in the building code. And so what we identified with this project is that there is a potential disconnect in the way that the town measures floor area, and that the way that the building code talks about habitable areas, be that in an attic or in a second floor. And so what staff suggested to ASCC is that this may be a topic that we wish to take up in the future, to look at our definition of floor area and decide if that needs any fine tuning. So we had a little bit of discussion at the preliminary meeting related to this project about whether that would be warranted. And I think that would be staff's recommendation over time, that we look at that definition of floor area and consider whether we need to make a revision to that. But the way I understood the ASCC's direction at the preliminary meeting was that they did not want to change the standing interpretation that the town had made related to floor area on this project. But if we were going to do it, we should do that looking forward, and not look at a project that was midstream. So that's kind of my general description of how that series of events went. Did that answer your question?
It does. Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah, I do think that as a group, we do need to look at this, because it seems to me that it does create the possibility in the future of someone making a massive house by playing a few tricks. In this case, I don't think it's a big deal, because I think it was well done, but I am concerned that it could be a big deal in the future.
Any other questions, Al?
Oh, let's see. Any other questions? No other questions for staff.
Other commissioners, questions of staff?
Yeah, I just had one. We're not allowed to ask any questions about the ADU, basically, are we?
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct. So the ADU has to have a ministerial approval under state law.
Dave? Any questions?
You're muted, Dave.
So
No question.
the administrative state law, they're doing this at the same time as we're doing this? Like the approval for the ADU?
So I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understand your question. The state law is in effect. And
So
so
currently that's being approved at the same time we're approving this portion of the project.
yes, actually, technically, the ADU will be approved when they apply for a building permit, and that will be its ministerial approval. It'll get approval through at the same time as the building permit is for the whole house. So we're required to intellectually separate it in terms of our analysis, but the plans will just show the house as the ASCC has approved it, and then the ADU included with that.
And so we don't consider parking spaces.
Correct. So the state law has changed in regards to how we consider parking for ADUs.
I have a question, which is, did the geologic report come back that was relevant to the basement?
So we actually, kind of a chain of events, the site development permit was originally applied for and then withdrawn. and then we moved the project forward to conceptual review. Subsequently, a site development permit was submitted. Unfortunately, it's just due to kind of clerical error, kind of the maelstrom of transitioning from being in office to remote work. The town geologist did not weigh in at this stage. We have conditioned the project to have the town geologist review and approve with conditions at the building permit stage, which is pretty standard for just a basement. I will note that the applicant did perform a geotech report in 2016, so they should be aware of any geotechnical issues that could be raised during that review at the building permit stage. So hopefully there will be no surprises.
Thank you, Dylan. All right, well, if everybody's asked their questions, I'm going to open it up to public comment.
I'm sorry,
Or
through the chair.
Carter, do you want to present?
Sure. Thank you
I
so
think
much.
you presented enough. Okay, go ahead.
Now
Carter.
for my second trick. This is such an incredible format. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Thank you, to Laura and Dylan for their staff report and for their diligence in helping us, move this forward. It is quite a creative project, and there are some things that wouldn't normally happen, within a project in Portola Valley, but because of the small size of this lot, it precipitated us doing some things that, Al, I don't think you're going to see, as a standard. I don't think that there's going to be, the incorporation of an ADU, into a home, or the use of habitable attics, to this point. This is, trying to be a pretty normal house with what's counted as a very, very small floor area. So I appreciate, everybody's work, moving this forward. We're pretty proud of the design. We think it's going to fit in quite nicely, and make, John, and his wife, a very nice home to retire to. The colors, materials are reminiscent, of what we're using, at the Hallett store, which has been received quite well by an awful lot of, both personal and public comment. The massing, is also, similar and reminiscent of that. We're fitting in, to a pretty small site. We made more than just a few, adjustments, including the removal of the roofing at the covered terrace area. We lowered the roof substantially, over the garage, and to use Megan's terms, we kind of messed with it a little, because her comments, with at the January meeting was it kind of needs to be massaged, and so it's kind of been massaged. I'm pretty pleased with the addition of the ADU. I know that we can't really deal with that, but it does help break down that edge of the building, and it will be providing an additional unit of housing in Portola Valley. We look forward to your questions and look forward to approval. The one thing that I would like to add back into the project, is the concept of the fencing as planned on the landscape plan. I'm sorry we don't have the details of that, and I'd be happy to to share those either as a follow-up ASCC item, or at the time of building permit with a subcommittee or a designated members review. Fencing between the residents and the kind of the office building, to me, is going to be necessary. And because of the small size of this lot, it's going to be necessary between the parking area and the back neighbor. So what's been planned on the landscape plan is our intention. There won't be a bocce court, but we would like your indulgence to to keep moving forward with the fencing, because it is something that they do want. You know, and we would come back with the details of that.
Thank you, Carter. Are there questions from the commission for Carter? No?
I have a question, yeah. I
Oh,
was surprised to see.
one more thing on the lighting. We'd be happy to reduce the number of lights in the garage to one. We'd like to keep the one on the corner.
Okay, I have a question on why do the light wells have lights in them? Is that something that's normal to do?
I'm not exactly sure. You know, I mean, it's part of an exiting sequence. You know, we have been required, you know, in the past, you know, by the building department, you know, because that's the required exit, you know, from those bedrooms downstairs, you know,
Okay,
to have lights. You know,
I see. So they would typically be off then.
yeah, it's not, you know, it's not part of a lighting scheme. There'd be a light
Okay.
next to the door. You know,
Right, okay. Okay,
I'm not a
so
big
that-
believer in master lighting. You know, it's about, you know, just what you need. And, you know, if you're there and you want to go out, you know, into that little light well.
Okay, that's good. It seemed a little strange to me, but that's a good explanation. Okay, that was my only question.
Okay.
Any other commissioner questions? Well, then I
I-
will then now, what? No?
I was just
Open
going to
up-
say, I had two questions, but Carter answered them both.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Oh, he answered them. I was going to ask
Oh,
how he felt about a single garage fixture and what future plans they might have for a fencing request. So
Okay. all right.
I think
So we'll move on. All right, so are there any comments from the public on this item? I think, Lori, you said there was someone in the audience. Let's see.
Yes.
Lynn Jacobson had her hand up first.
Okay, Lynn?
So I'll allow Lynn to talk. So we're unmuting her now.
I think she's got herself muted.
And then Lynn, you can unmute yourself and you'll be able to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. My biggest concern was the basement. We live on the fault. A lot of us, as I wrote in the letter, I know we've had a trench 6 times, we and our neighbor, for adding, I don't know what they add. Well, I do know what they added, but we added a little guest house on the corner. Our children were made to come home from school, and in the 23 or whatever number homes there are in Hidden Valley, I think there were only 2 that didn't have little children at the time. Now it seems mostly adult, but we all had a lot of little kids. And Armandale did all kinds of drills, and they had our kids come home with written instructions, verbal instructions to please practice earthquake drills at your home. We did so. I had 3 kids. Some of the people here had more. And we exited doors. We had plans to exit windows. I don't understand how you can have a basement, whether it's 3 feet or 30 feet from the fault line. As far as I know, there are no basements in the homes here. You can jump out a window if there's a quake. You can run out a door, but how you're going to get up out of a basement and out the front door or through any windows, I don't think it's possible. I've lived through quite a few earthquakes here, and we've been very lucky as all the rooms are hexagonal, which is preferable to right angles, as probably you all know when it comes to an earthquake. We've had the pool emptied and empty in the 89 quake. Quakes before that, we've had different pieces of sculpture thrown into the rooms, lamps down, etc. So to me, it's a very dangerous situation. And to say storage, and I'm going to make this quick, you could actually walk from where you guys are now, and you will find after you built, after the people have built, been inspected and all, I've seen them, I've been in them, attics, not inhabitable. Oh yeah, they break through the roof, they put in windows, garages, stables, hothouses, a chicken house, all treated as bedrooms. That's what they do after you've inspected. And I admire the inspection, I admire the rules, but it doesn't hold. The things that go on, I've had, and one in Portola Valley was torn down on a Sunday after it had been sold. And it was claimed that they had termites. How can it be sold without a termite inspection? It was. They tore it down on a Sunday, took everything to the dump, and then claimed to the town hall that, oh, well, we can't prove that it had termites because everything's in the dump. That's neither here nor there, but I just, I guess I don't trust what people are or are not going to do. But I don't know how you can alleviate the danger in the basement. I'm not trying to stop the house. I think it's a wonderful, plan. I think they've maximized. I think they should get in a bocce ball, basketball court, everything they can get in. I don't know if they have children or not. So good luck to them, but I think you really should consider this basement thing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And then I see Judy Murphy is up next.
Pardon?
Judy?
Yep, I'm
Okay.
here, although, look, I saw Carter's hand up. Did you want to respond to her, Carter, before?
No, I'll do that altogether.
Okay, just two very quick things. One was that the Conservation Committee,
Oh, we lost her.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was my fault. Sorry, Judy. Just a second. That should have done it.
okay,
There she is.
Sorry.
Conservation Committee had suggested in our report that that a fence between the residences was inappropriate, that they're all squashed in there, and a fence becomes a much more dramatic and obvious barrier between, and it would make more sense to do that with shrubbery. You could get the kind of privacy you need and sense of enclosure for your own house without this fence that would look more like a fence than most fences do, because it's crammed in there. It does make sense to have one between the residence and the commercial, just because the nature of what's going on at the commercial place. But these small enclosed areas, I live on Portola Green Circle, as some of you know, and we're all close in here, not as close as this guy. And we on purpose don't have fences so that the yard's kind of, there's some sense of flow. There's some sense that you still live in Portola Valley with its vistas and a little bit of room instead of squishing you in between fences. So I think I would not be in favor, the Conservation Committee would not be in favor of allowing a fence in there. The other is that we had several comments on the planting plan. There were commingling of plants with different needs of various kinds, shade, sun, etc. And I don't know if a revised landscape plan was done or not. I haven't seen it, but I hope that some of those suggestions were listened to. And I'm not sure what the feedback loop is for making sure that they were.
Thank you, Judy.
That's it.
Is there any other public comment? And then we'll let Carter respond. Okay, doesn't look like it.
Okay.
Okay, Carter, you're up.
To respond to Ms. Jacobson's comments about the basement, We think, we thought long and hard about, how to deal with exiting. The two main rooms have light wells, as well as a permanent stair coming out of the basement. And we feel confident that, in an emergency situation, whether it's a fire, or an earthquake, that exiting, will be readily accomplished. The basement, has been preliminarily, approved by our geologist. He's got cautions about, hydraulic pressures, making sure, that we protect, the building from that. That's the reason that the light wells are all enclosing, so that, the walls of the light wells are above any floodplain to make sure that, water that's coming from offsite, won't end up, down inside those light wells. Judy's questions about, the landscaping, is I appreciate her, concern about, the back property line fence. But it's actually for both neighbors, I think, because of the relationship of the garage, to the back neighbor. That we would like to end up with, a board fence, along that edge. It really is about, small lots, but other than that, I didn't have any additional comments.
Okay, thank you.
Anything
So
about
now let's,
the landscaping
what?
plan?
Yeah.
The landscaping plan, the planting plan, Carter?
I'm not a plant expert, so, Bob Cleaver prepared, the planting plan, and there isn't a lot to it. It's a pretty small lot. A lot of it is decorative, out towards the front, with a tree in each area, and some planting. I'm happy to relive it, as a condition of approval through, the, Conservation Committee, because of their expertise. It really was, intended to be, pretty simple, and, using, natives from the list.
I reviewed it, it seemed fine.
Okay.
I'm concerned about the valley oaks that seem to be all planted along the fence. On my plan, I've got like a long row of valley oaks, and it says you're only asking for what, or you're only planting one. It looks more to me like 30.
I think that that's the equisetum that along that fence line, which is a small plant.
There's a shrub along the fence line, between the parking and the fence. The trees.
It looks very similar to the oak one.
There's three trees.
Oh, right, the spider rush. Is that the one?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But then it says there's only one of those, but there's definitely more than one of those.
No, there's about 30 of them.
Yeah. So I don't understand the numbers on the planting, plant list. They don't seem to relate to the actual plan. So
Well, I'm sure Bob Cleaver didn't put in 30 valley oaks.
no,
There are three.
but I mean, it says it's only
200
got
foot
one.
radius.
But it says it's only got one spider rush, and there's definitely more of the spider rush.
Yeah, something's funky about the quantities. You're right.
Well,
I
the
didn't
quantities,
notice that.
I think it's the
wouldn't-
graphic.
To help move this forward,
Go ahead.
Dana, I'd be happy to relive, the details of the planting plan.
Yep.
I know the quantities, as shown in the graphic, are accurate. The quantities in the table, clearly are not accurate.
Right.
And, take into account, the comments of the, commission, of the Conservation Committee. Because, the landscape plan has to be updated, to include the ADU.
Right. Yeah.
Somebody will look at this.
Okay,
Yeah, I think, a follow-up is clearly necessary, and a follow-up either with a designated member of the ASCC,
Yep.
with the concerns of the Conservation Committee would be a rational, condition of approval.
Good.
And
Right.
I'd also echo that because the landscape plan that we're referencing also shows a bocce ball court. So if
Right.
that is being removed from the scope of work, so I believe that probably can be rolled into the same condition that we're mentioning as well. I just wanted to point that out as well related to the bocce ball court.
Absolutely, Dylan, that makes sense.
okay.
All right. Well, Jane, you're on the screen. Do you want to lead us off with your comments?
I would like to see the light removed at the garage door. I'd like to see the landscape plan come back to conservation and or the ASCC. I probably had a question actually. When it said that the property wasn't compliant with the build it green, and you needed to add 20 points, how were you going to do that? Was that going to be with the photovoltaic or the electric vehicle charging or the grey water treatment?
I'm not exactly sure. We have to retain a green building consultant, to do that. Doing that with the building permit, is a more appropriate stage when we're getting into, the techniques of construction, the techniques of, essentially making this home as close to, zero in, zero out energy.
Right, okay.
And so having that as a condition of approval is, perfectly rational.
Okay.
I mean, the point total is a lot, for a house that, a house this size.
Right. Okay, but otherwise I like the colour schemes, lighting plan, and although I feel it is a big property for the size of the land it's being built on, I could make the findings as listed by the staff.
Okay. Al?
Okay, just stepping back, I think it's a very clever design for a complex project. It's there's not a lot of space, and I think that it's going to actually fit in quite well. It's big, but when I was over there today looking at the story poles, I don't think that it's going to be objectionable from Portola Road, and it's not going to be objectionable from the shopping center. I think it's going to be noticeable from the other homes back behind the Howlett store, but everybody's going to know when they buy those homes what they're getting into, and it's fine. It just looks like an area that's highly developed. So I think that you've done a really good job with the design. I think the materials and the colors look great, and the roofing material and the stone are nice touches. So lots of positives really for what looked to me to be almost impossible project. I do like the idea of a fence between the house and the Howlett store. I kind of agree with Judy that I would rather see some sort of shrubs or landscaping to separate between the different houses. That would be my preference. Let's see, other comments. The landscaping plan as it exists is good. I mean, I think that the water use is fine. I did think that there was a couple of weird things where there was manzanitas mixed in with ferns, and I thought that was kind of an odd choice. So I think that re-looking at the landscaping plan to make sure that low water use and higher water use things are more separated would make sense. But in general, I thought that the plant choices were good. And I thought that the trees and the plantings over by the driveway area were particularly good. I think that that's going to help soften the appearance of the house. Let's see, we talked about blight wells. We talked about the habitable attic space. I do think that from a ASCC and planning staff point of view, we really should just try to clarify rules and get the floor area calculation and the building code definitions in alignment so that we don't have this sort of confusion in the future. Let's see. I think that's basically my comments. It's really I think that it's a good design for the site.
Okay, thank you. Megan, are you there? Did we lose you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
I did. I had poor signal for some reason and it dropped you. Sorry about that. And now I have a hummingbird stuck in the house, but my youngest daughter is on top of it. It's been every day this week we've had a hummingbird in the house.
That's like a blessing, isn't it?
I know. We've already named him. His name is Magic. So yeah. Anyways, I really enjoy the color palette. I think it blends beautifully in with the Hallett store and within Portola Valley. I'm glad you're up for that lighting change with the garage light with the gooseneck fixture, just using one. I did love the idea of the bocce court. I see why it no longer can exist. But I did think that was kind of a fun use of such a tight space, since, you know, you're not really going to have a place to run around out there. I do agree with fencing could certainly be a possibility between the Hallett store and this property. I hate to say recommending a hedge like fence between the properties, so we'll discuss that later when this comes back up to us. And I'm looking forward to seeing the updated landscaping plan, and I think it's a really creative use of a tight space, and way to go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said so far. It's a nifty design and a lot of massaging, refinement, craft went into preparing this. So I'm impressed with it. You get a lot of function and a lot of use out of a pretty small lot. I also support the single garage fixture idea. Fencing between the uses, the commercial and residential, seems very appropriate to me. I'm personally not a big fan of fences between residential neighbors, but we seem to have settled on that culturally. Just about everybody in my neighborhood now has, didn't used to have any, but as people have kids and dogs and things they want to contain, it seems to you know, become more of a necessity. I'm willing to entertain the idea, but I'd like to see it or have one of us review it as part of a overall landscape plan and maybe go out there and try to visualize it a little bit. Maybe there's a portion of it that can have a board fence, a portion that would have landscape screening. I don't know. I'm sure there's some solution that would work. Build it green points. Good luck. You could maybe restore next door and pick up a few points that way. Walking distance to a grocery store. I'm not terribly concerned about basement exiting. That's a topic that has been looked at very carefully in building code review and development process. And so I'm pretty confident in the way the modern building codes handle exiting from basement areas, even under hazardous situations. So I'm, you know, with the condition, of course, that the geotech has to sign a project, I'm sure the building code review would catch anything that would be non-compliant there. So I'm very supportive of this project with a couple minor tweaks in the conditions and a review by perhaps a single member, maybe by a single member plus somebody from Conservation Committee, if that's appropriate, to review a revised landscape plan.
Thanks, Dave. I really don't have a whole lot to add. I think it's a great project. Megan, I loved your comment about the relationship between the house and the Hallett store. I love the Hallett store. And I think that this is all just going to work very nicely together. I feel very confident that, I mean, we know Bob Cleaver's work. I think, one commissioner taking a look at that would be smart, and the fencing. And I feel confident that we can figure that out with one commissioner.
Yes.
And so, was anyone entertaining a motion?
I could go ahead and make a motion to approve the project with the conditions in our staff report, including the removal of one garage light fixture to come into compliance, and the updated landscaping plan and fence proposals for review by a single ASCC member, and the Build It Green checklist, of course, to come back to the town.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
I,
No nays, and so we're moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Finally, Carter. Okay,
Thank
Carter,
thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Aura. I really appreciate your work on this.
Of course.
Carter.
Yeah.
Carter,
Yes?
would you mind sticking around for the next couple of items? Because I've served with you longer than anybody. And I just want to make sure that some of the comments that I am going to make are accurate. And I think
Sure.
you could help that.
I'm happy to.
All right, thank you. And so we're finished that item and we're moving on to the two items that, whoops. We okay to move on? Laura?
Yeah.
That
Yes.
was that noise. Okay, so both of the next items, I took a lot of notes, so I need to look down to refer. Both of the next items have come up because of conversations I've had with concerned neighbors, residents, and fellow volunteers. After doing more extensive discussion, Laura and I thought it might be a good decision at some point to meet with the Planning Commission, ASCC, and CARA. And I'd love to include Tom Vlasic and former commissioners to help planning staff understand historical processes for the ASCC and Planning Commission. To the first item, changes to approved projects. Over the past years, ASCC has raised concern over projects which have changed significantly post-final. 3 examples: the corner of Alpine and Los Trancos in the scenic corridor, Antonio Court, where the large oak trees were put in, and more recently, the Mainzer property on Mapache at the end of Zapata. They all went through ASCC with a lot of decision, a lot of hard work, and all post-final changes the look and feel of the intent of the approved design. I remain flummoxed that we no longer seem to have the teeth to at least threaten enforcement. If the language is not such yet, I hope that we will get it in the near future. An approved project by ASCC is essentially a contract between the applicant and the town. Even after the building project has been finalized, if an applicant wants to modify a plan, ASCC, an additional review has been required to see if we agree with that change. In the case of Antonio Court, a PUD, unauthorized change to the ASCC approved plan would also be viewed as a violation of the PUD and could cause that to come into review. ASCC reviews used to be more extensive, which is our next subject, and our approval critical to the implementation of the general plan, zoning ordinance, site development ordinance, and the ASCC review objectives are set forth which are set forth in the design guidelines. So a violation of an ASCC approval would also be a violation of the zoning ordinance where ASCC reviews are codified, and by extension, the general plan. There are teeth in these documents to uphold our approvals and to expect code enforcement. So that was the kind of the statement. That's what I've been thinking about. Megan, you also saw Mainzer.
Yep. Yeah.
And I, want to open some discussion about this.
Well, and there are more cases I can think of in my past 9 years as well, where someone has put a runway of lights up their driveway in full view, maybe 30 days into their occupancy, you know,
Right.
so it's almost a slap in the face, and it's a total disregard for what we're trying to provide for the town, is that everyone has the same beautiful enjoyment of Portola Valley. And we don't really seem to get anyone to go look at them necessarily, or certainly not any enforcement.
I'd like to see some language, you know, in somewhere that really talks about this contractual agreement between an applicant and the ASCC, and that the expectation is that there are to be no changes. And I think that needs to be written down somewhere, because it needs to have teeth, and traditionally it has had teeth. So, you know, I want to make these things stick, our decisions stick.
Yeah,
Any thought?
historically, these, a design review approval, uh, you know, whether implicitly or tacitly, uh, you know, ran with the property, so that, the whole reason for spending so much time on colors, materials, lighting, landscape, the details of the architecture, is, in hopes, that everyone complies. And historically 95%, of applicants do, and it tends to stay that way. And nearly everyone sneaks in a few things, a few extra lights here and there, and if they're, snuck in and nobody notices, that's one thing. But, the string of lights up a driveway, or the new hedge outside the fence, are things that, I'm offended by, and I'm offended that my client is one of these guys. And it drives me absolutely batty. Because the ASCC's decisions are not arrived at lightly. You guys agonize over it. When I did it, I agonized over it, for hours every meeting, to make sure that, our recommendations and our adjustments were, important. And there's examples of the 5%, that just ignore us, all over town, filling up, frontages with plants, and there's got to be enough teeth someplace, that, you could say, no, that's not what our intention was. Our intention was to keep, keep some view to the grass, beyond the fence, rather than, getting it all filled up. So, it hasn't been a town that most times we had to enforce very much. And it was part of the reason that when we did the lighting ordinance, that we provided some enforceability, when people put in lights that, even without permits later, lighting is something that, we actually have some teeth in the ordinance to deal with. But planting.
Yeah, I mean, especially at the Mazer property, the spotlights, these huge spotlights that were put into the lawn facing back to the house. It's not like just adding a simple path light that maybe really just illuminates a path that we didn't really want illuminated. It's a very aggressive move of a fixture we would not support.
And they planted
ever.
plants around them too. It's
Oh
like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and
it's
then
published
of
on the
course they put
website.
it on sale for us all to see, and videos on TV, and it's just, it was really an in-your-face kind of move.
And they completely altered their first house at Nathorst and Portola.
Yep.
I mean, the whole point was to keep the feeling of the local orchards open. They come in and put this huge berm and covered in an oleander, which is why on this one, Mapache, I was paying such close attention.
We were
to
there
what they
so
were gonna
many times. We were there multiple times after trees came down with permission, and we even placed certain plants on site. And now there's a hedge in front.
Well, I'm more interested in just that we're gonna have these outcomes every now and then, and I agree with Carter. I don't care about someone coming and planting a couple bougainvilleas that weren't on the plan. I'm talking about something that alters the look of the land. And so these things have really got my attention. And before we discuss, why don't I move on to the second item, because they kind of work together, and then maybe we can talk a little bit. There's a gestation period to good design. ASCC used to be involved before the town required complete applications to bring to the commission. I think it is critical that a member of the ASCC or a subcommittee be involved from the get-go on any application from the beginning of the conceptual process. By expecting complete applications before we see them, the town essentially objectifies the project. ASCC, however, has always had a more subjective role, working with residents to massage projects, offer our ideas and guidance for better projects. Goya, for example, was painful for both of the applicant and the neighbor. I felt terrible for them. ASCC saw this so late and there was so little opportunity to make changes. And I believe that if we had been participating from the early stages, a good design solution could have been reached. Over the weekend, I received agitated emails regarding the design for the new fire station on Portola Road. There had already been 2 meetings with design officials, staff, and neighbors. I had no idea. I think with ASCC involvement, we are the neighbors, we are fellow residents, and understand, and really by the way our town works. We decide. It makes things more difficult to help projects be successful when there isn't much else to do, that we're not doing anything other than counting light fixtures. I think we need to do a better job for Portola Valley and help the planners. So I'd like to see an ASCC member involved with the gestation of every project. I also think the town should have a consulting architect, since there is no architect on the commission. I can see a design problem like Goya was for me, but I don't know how to fix it. Until we make changes, if we do, I'd like to see a discussion in every staff report that pertains to anything that they're working on, if from the beginning. So I would like to have known all these months that the fire station was coming, or any other addresses, so that we can get our arms around what's coming at us. And so that's all I wanted to talk about in these 2 items. And I think we need to take a look at the process.
Yeah, Dana, I think it's so important that us as residents know what's happening, because otherwise it feels like it's the town against a builder, against a neighbor, and it's not transparent, or it just feels like we're on different sides when the ASCC is really not.
No,
Because
people have loved our participation.
Yes.
There's also the history of self-governance in our town. And like I said, I think we're doing a lot of time counting light bulbs and approving colors these days. And we used to be talking about roof pitches, massing, all of that. And I'm concerned. I think we need, we need to get involved earlier. And I don't know how we can do that at this point, but I think it's really important. And I think our process has kind of lost its way. Any other feedback?
Jane's got her hand up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to address point B, because I don't think that the ASCC should add to the levels of bureaucracy that we've already got in town, that the residents already complain about. How much extra would this notion cost the applicant? How much longer would it take for applicants to have their project heard if this was added? What if the ASCC member involved disagreed with the town, the applicant, and the other ASCC members did agree, isn't this a way of enforcing a particular viewpoint of a commissioner prior to an actual discussion of the ASCC? Let's go back to Goya, because you're referring Goya again. Only one person disagreed with the decision on Goya out of 9. The other 8 commissioners all agreed it. So I do not want to see this being directed in one direction without full discussion. I already thought that if we reported, or if somebody reported an incident on the PV Connect or to the town or to a staff member, that the site was visited and the code was enforced. So I'm prepared to continue discussing A, but on B, I'm in complete disagreement.
You know, I'm looking at it more as a facilitating the process and making things easier and faster.
I think it will make it harder and slower.
Yeah, if I could, through the chair.
Yes.
And you guys all know that I spent more than 20 years doing your jobs. And during that time, there was a couple things that were different. You know, the first was that, you know, the planning, you know, planner, you know, was Tom Vlasic, who did a yeoman's job of coaching applicants about what the ASCC was about, you know, and kind of where the hot buttons were. Projects where he felt that applicants were going to be, you know, recalcitrant or, you know, difficult, or there was a relationship between neighbors that was going to be difficult. You know, he and usually a subcommittee, you know, of the ASCC met with, you know, with clients, applicants or potential applicants, you know, to vet ideas, you know, and think through, you know, site planning issues, you know, or screening issues or relationship issues, you know, before, you know, applicants were required to, you know, to put together, you know, complete civil engineering and landscape, you know, drawings, you know, with wheeload calculations and green points and all this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and it was much more effective, you know, at helping, you know, resolve things, you know, before neighbors got, you know, up in arms. You know, it was a kindler, gentler process. And it was, you know, so early, you know, that, you know, architects appreciated it, you know, because, you know, we had a chance to make, you know, material adjustments, you know, that were not costly to our clients, you know, that met the needs of both sides, you know, or all 3 sides, you know, the town, you know, our clients, you know, and the neighbors, you know, before it became, you know, expensive and time consuming. Because, you know, Jane, the process, you know, of completing an application, you know, is expensive and enormously time consuming. You know, if you look back, you know, in the record, you know, 15 or 20 years ago and looked at the documents, you know, that applicants had to, you know, present, you know, as part of their application, it was pretty skinny and pretty basic, you know, and a lot of things, you know, became conditions of approval that needed, you know, some things needed to come back to the whole ASCC, some things, you know, were going to be reviewed by staff. You know, it was a lot skinnier process, but it was a friendlier, you know, happier relationship that most people had, you know, because they had access, you know, to either ASCC commissioners, you know, for subcommittee meetings, or had, you know, access to the whole commission, you know, for a study session to review things, you know, before they were really applications. To me, it actually made, you know, the process of being, you know, an ASCC commissioner more fun, you know, because you had the opportunity to kibitz. You know,
Yeah, massage a project where we don't have these neighbor fights and this aggressive, you know, the Goya situation is really upsetting. you
We've
know.
only had, okay, there's been one neighbour fight. I mean,
Oh, no, 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 no. There's been many
that's,
neighbors.
that's been appealed, one.
Oh, yeah, okay, but not neighbor fights.
But I mean, we've had, the town people already think that the town is involved too much in their business. I mean, you just get that general gist from posts on the forum, from comments to people. So I don't know why we would want to add another layer of bureaucracy to them.
We aren't the level of bureaucracy. The town is, the government, the staff is. That is the creating the bureaucracy.
But the
And I think
staff,
Dave's got a comment.
Very little bureaucracy.
assist the homeowners with the plans. The staff is there to assist the homeowners with the plans before they come to us. So
Staff is
basically,
there to assist ASCC making decisions.
Dana, if I may,
Yes. Dave,
thank you. I think we're sort of talking around the issue from my point of view. I think if we take a step back and recognize that we serve the community best when we respond to applicants' needs, and keeping in mind the community's needs as well, instead of the idea of forcing something on somebody to make the process worse. I think what we're talking about is encouraging people to take advantage of an opportunity to make the process easier,
yes.
or potentially less adversarial or contentious. A few years ago, we started talking about the occasional project that came to us as a preliminary review, which was always required. But the projects were so well thought out and so close to being ready for a building permit review that we said to ourselves and to staff, gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was an option for applicants to submit for a single review?
Yeah.
Skip the preliminary if it looks like something that meets all the guidelines, there's no special needs for this project, just let them come through for action on their first review. And that eventually made it into the process. And so we now have that option, and it's a good option. I think it has had a little bit of an unintended consequence, which is that it might seem like too good an option for too many projects. And so we're not seeing projects in the sort of conceptual design phase. It feels to me like when I first began on ASCC, and I only have the third longest tenure among us after Dana and Megan. But when I first began, it seemed to me that we saw more conceptuals, not even calling them really preliminary reviews, but at more of a concept phase. I recall not that long ago a project, which neighborhood was that? Up above the Portola Valley Presbyterian Church, that where the applicant and architect had a couple different ideas about where to place the house on the site. And we discussed it with them at that point.
Yeah.
So not only was it not a complete application, it was far from even being an application, because they were still trying to decide what end of the property to put their house on. And they were looking for feedback from us. And as Carter said, that was fun. And I think that because we had that conceptual session with them, that the review, the action review that we took was very straightforward. So it seems to me that that opportunity is still there for applicants, but they don't know to ask for it, or they want to be ambitious and go for the whole thing at once. And I think it would be really great to have an agenda agenda item to discuss this, or as Dana proposed, a working session with staff to try to get to a point where there's actual encouragement of applicants with certain types of projects to come in for more of a conceptual review. So I can see us adding that study session to our work plan for next year.
And,
Can you
and
guys still?
also, Dave, we're actually free.
That's right.
We're free. And you know, I've lived here for 46 years. I'm an interior designer. I know how to read plans. I've built so many houses myself and properties all over, from, you know, Lake Tahoe to locally to Hawaii. And I know what I'm talking about. And I love that I live here and I have the opportunity to help people make their project the best it can be for themselves and for their neighbors. And it's free.
It's
But
a
what
card
about the
resource
staff?
that-
The staff involvement. So they're going to come to a member of the ASCC.
No, that we're part of it.
advertise
We're
on
part of it
forum
from the
this
beginning.
morning, and they come to us before they go to the staff. Is that what you're saying?
No. That it's
Then
I
it's
mean,
No, I
we're
think
integrated.
it's not free then, is
elaborate
it?
a little bit on my suggestion here. People always come to staff first, unless they're, you know, have inside knowledge.
Yeah.
But they'll always come to staff and say, you know, we're thinking about redeveloping this piece of property. We want to know what the rules and the guidelines are. Staff very early on, I think, could make an evaluation that says, here's a project that's going to have a lot of challenges and could really benefit from a conceptual review, a pre-preliminary review. Offer a very low cost application. It's not going to require much staff work at all. A simple check for backs and height limits, something like that, floor area calculation. And then let the applicant sit down with the full ASCC for a minimal application fee and just talk through the project before they start really putting pencil to paper. Sketches, we could look at sketches. And if that option is available and it's known to applicants, especially if they're facing a challenging program and site, they might jump at that opportunity because it puts them on a path that has a greater chance of success
It
instead
also
of
has
getting
the
so far
opportunity
into it.
of creating more outreach to the neighbors. You know, so that the neighbors have, you know, more sense that they can contribute as well, because those would be public meetings.
Yes.
Yeah, I like the idea of more involvement earlier on, because I mean, one of my objections is I don't feel like we have much influence on siting or roof lines or heights, because by the time we see the plans, those things are baked in and it's so expensive to change them.
Yes.
And those are some of the things that have the biggest impact on sort of how much a project affects the surrounding homes and community. And we really have little impact on those things at this point.
You know, when we see a project that we could take action on and we say something to the applicant like, and we're looking at drawings that are practically construction drawings.
Right.
And we say to them, gosh, can't you lower the ridge by 2 feet? And as a contractor, I cringe at that, because making a change at that point in the development of a project is not only going to be expensive to go through and change every drawing, it really opens the door for design errors, coordination problems between the drawings, between the structural and the architectural, and ultimately extra costs on the project when somebody discovers that the structural plan says one thing and the architectural says something else, and now it has to be resolved with the change order.
It's too easy to make changes when they're scribbles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very easy then, yes. So, and Jane, to your point, I really don't see this as a burden placed on applicants, but an option that's offered to them. Not everybody would need it. Not everybody would benefit from it. Not everybody would, but I think staff, in staff's judgment, with a little more, you know, sort of help from us as a body with our combined knowledge of how this has been done here for so long, would be able to suggest this to applicants. Not say now you have to go through 3 steps, a conceptual, preliminary, and a final, but to say, here's an opportunity to get early input before you've invested $50,000 in the design process, so that you can be on a path to success here. And it would be totally optional. It's not something that the staff or the ASCC would mandate. We're here to try to make the project more successful for the town, on the town's behalf, but also for the applicant.
If it's
And,
optional and cheap for the applicant and not another layer of bureaucracy, and
No,
all of us and not just one of us, then I'm more in agreement. But I can't see that it should be just sort of one meeting or anything that should cost people in town more time, more money. I think they're already paying enough.
no, I think it would definitely need to be a full commission meeting, not just a single member or a rotating duty, but done at a point when somebody's just starting out on their project. And again, only at their request, but with the option available to them so that they know it's there. I can imagine architects who, first of all, we all know Portola Valley is notorious for a difficult planning approval process, including the ASCC. So if somebody comes into a little tentative about this and starts trying to understand all the rules and the guidelines so they can get their design right, they should know that they have an opportunity to get a very basic staff review for things like setbacks, floor area, and then get in front of the ASCC to get into the more difficult to understand parts of it, the design guidelines. You know, why can't you put a cantilevered house on the ridge? Well, we can explain that to you.
Yeah.
You know, you don't even have to consider that option once you've, you know, we've kind of talked through your plan with you. Got a certain program, a certain square footage you want to get, a certain affect or feel. And let's talk about what your options are that, again, would be the easiest ones for us to approve when it comes down to it. And not just from a single member, but just a talking
All of
session
us.
with all of us.
all of us. I mean, it's an opportunity for really valuable guidance to our neighbors. And we understand and know the community. And I think it would be, I like the idea you guys have of having it as an option available. And I think we should explore that more.
Any complicated project would be well benefited, and it'll make, it gives you just, as an owner and design team, it gives you a way to say, gosh, I'm going down the wrong way. I need to make a pivot or a shift.
Earlier, yes, earlier.
Earlier before we invest more, or, kind of think of it like a feasibility study, where you say, ooh, that works, or man, that's crap.
And what effect would that have legally if we did have those optional meetings and we said something or suggested something and it didn't comply and they said, but the ASCC said that this was okay? We'd have to look into those legal ramifications as well.
I think
to make sure that we weren't being held to any decisions or suggestions, because it wouldn't be a town suggestion. I mean, it wouldn't be a town committee officially, would it? It would be a subcommittee.
No,
that was making
No.
suggestions.
the ASCC, I think.
I'm talking about the full ASCC, not a. And even in our preliminary reviews, it's possible that we might suggest something that the staff checks in and says, by the way, on that particular parcel, we need to maintain the 50-foot front yard setback, and it'll be very hard to make an exception without a variance. So the staff still needs to be involved to apply their knowledge of the rules. And I think a very basic review before it comes onto the agenda of what's available on the site. How many square feet? What are the setbacks? What are the height limits?
So staff time would still be required, even though, so that is again another cost, isn't it?
No, it's the same cost. It's just happening earlier.
Yeah, and it's a small portion of the cost. So if you look at the whole continuum of the staff review of a project from the first encounter in town hall, all the way through submitting it for a building permit, that first sort of programming conceptual stage is probably less than 10% of the total effort required to put together a fully fleshed out project ready for building permit review. So it's a piece of the whole process, but it's just separated so that it's done earlier and potentially makes the middle part of the process more efficient for
Right.
everybody, town staff, for us, and for the applicant.
Dylan and Laura, do you think this would add to your workload or decrease it?
Well, I think we have to, this is a preliminary conversation. And so we have to think further about all of this. We have to think about resources. We have to think through the details. And so I'll remind everyone the procedure that we set out for both ASCC and Planning Commission about 2 years ago is that when ASCC or Planning Commission has an idea of something that they'd like to add to the work program, we talk about it here, which is what we're doing now. And then we bring that to a meeting of the mayor and the chairs of both commissions. And we just put it into context and think about some of the details and how we might implement it. And then we come back and decide what the next steps are. So is that a study session, or is that an ASCC work group? Or, how does it fit in? When do we do it? And how do we do it? And so my recommendation, if there seems to be consensus from what I'm hearing from the ASCC tonight, that this is something that you want to consider further, my recommendation would be the next step is that we bring it to a meeting of the mayor and the chairs so that we can talk about it further and figure out, how we may be able to implement something, because staff has not analyzed any of this prior to this conversation tonight. So we do need to really think through any implications of what the suggestions are.
And what about the A part, which was enforcing ASCC and...
So I have been having more communications with Cara about this since the ASCC has raised this issue and brought it back to me. We have revisited these questions in the legal authority. And so there is a state law, and my understanding of it is that in order for the planning approval to be binding and run with the land, it has to be recorded at the county recorder's office, so that any potential buyer who purchased the property would know that those conditions are in place. And so if we wish to do that, we need to figure out any procedures for doing that. That's the way to legally make it run with the land. Cara and I have taken a look at our current conditions and landed on, we do have more enforcement authority. So we are pivoting in response to the feedback that we got from ASCC. And she does feel that we have reasonable enforcement authority from our first condition of approval that we add onto projects, even post-final, which I think is good news for all of us that spend many, many hours on these projects. So we do need to figure out how to staff kind of the enforcement portion of this. So I need to think through that and talk to Jeremy about how to do it. But Cara has indicated that we can do some enforcement. Now it is somewhat limited, but that's what we need to think about and work on. And again, if the commission, I think there's consensus to work on this issue, we would bring that to the meeting of the mayor and chairs as well, so that we could come up with a path forward. So those would be my, recommendations at this point based on what we're hearing from ASCC tonight.
I think it would also be great for Cara to talk to Sandy Sloan, because she was in her office, and Sandy Sloan would help keep teeth in the enforcement. I mean, we used to enforce. So, I think it would be great for her to sort of talk about Portola Valley historically, what our processes were like. So that might be a fun conversation for her.
And Dana, through the chair, I don't know if you wish to, but there are two attendees with their hands up. I don't know if you want to take comments from members of
Sorry.
the public.
Sorry,
there's-
I thought everybody was gone other than.
Well, they raised their hands in the course of this conversation.
I don't
So there's Rob, Jack,
Oh.
and Judy Murphy both have their hands up.
Okay, let's go. Rob Jack.
Okay, let me allow him to talk.
I'm gonna go. See you guys.
Bye, Carter. Thank you.
Hi, Carter.
Thanks, Carter.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Hi, Carter.
Rob Jack.
Oh, hi, this is Mary Jack speaking
Ah.
to both of us this evening. We're residents on West Ridge Drive, and we're enjoying the process and listening to all of you as you've been going through a couple projects. But I do feel motivated to speak up, to say here, here to both of these ideas. I think it really would be a positive for the projects as caring neighbors. The ones that we've gotten involved in often happens so far into the project. And as what you're saying, the cost and time involved, it ends up becoming upsetting to both the architects, the neighbors, you get labeled an obstructionist. So many things get off the track, which is really about keeping our town such a beautiful place that we all love and with neighbors that we all care about and feel good about. So as well, I have been to several meetings in the past, in the old days, where yes,
Uh-oh.
things
Are you
that did
there?
not either end up being approved as such or later changed. The runway lights, I've got one right now I'd love to tell you about. So I just really want to support this concept. I hope the discussion will carry on and you'll follow through on these good ideas. As a caring townsperson, I think it will make everybody feel better about the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah,
And
Thank you
that
for
is-
listening.
Was that Judy Murphy, the other one? Full attendee list. Yes, Judy.
Okay, thank you. I want to speak briefly to Dana's second point. I've never been on the ASCC, but I've watched it very closely for the 15 years that I've been on conservation and have gone to the majority of your meetings probably, and most of your site visits. And I've seen a change during that time. And I would say that what's been lost is this sort of creative aspects of cooperation between the applicant and the town. And that the culture of the town and its aesthetic and the knowledge of the previous problems that you've had with other sites and other applicants and how they went astray is known to the people who sit on the ASCC because they've been doing this for years, or just they've lived in town and watched it. And that there's been a big turnover in the planning department, not just recently, but sequentially, there's been a lot of turnover in the planning department. And so that kind of more subtle stuff about the local aesthetic and how it's come to be and how it's what it was and where things went wrong and how they got righted again is not known to the planning staff and is known to the ASCC members. And that as a result of that, a lot of planning is often then restricted to being more mechanical, looking at the checklist, looking at the numbers, looking at the setbacks and the aesthetic part of it, the fitting in part of it, which is what ASCC was so important for and did so well, has sort of gotten lost. I think that that now when things come to you, when they come to us and on conservation, and then they come to you, they're essentially finished. They're almost finished. And it becomes so expensive to change then that it's got to be a major hoo-ha to ask them to change it. And I actually think, Jane, that it would be less expensive to have this process because they were less expensive total overall if they had a chance to sort of explore things early and get feedback early and know what might not fly before they're asked to change it when they've already got so much committed on paper, so much so many hours into making this full set of plans, these 20 sets of plans that have gone to everybody. And then it's difficult to change. So I think it's a great idea. And I think that you guys, really the ASCC should, not just because it'd be more interesting and fun, but for the value of the projects that get created, this sort of idea part of it shouldn't be lost. Thank you. That's it.
Dana, may I speak?
Thank you. Yes.
And I'm speaking mostly to Laura here, and that is that I understand that there's a process to go through to bring an idea like this forward, to get the town council on board, the resources lined up, and so on. I would like to make sure that as that approach is being crafted to the town council, that it be in consultation with one of us that has, been on the ASCC the longest, to make sure that it isn't being, that we're not making a mountain out of a molehill if we don't need to. In other words, if we already have processes in that are just kind of being underutilized right now, or recommended in different ways. For example, this idea of a conceptual review, in my thinking about it, is not something that's new, that would need new regulations or new procedures. It's actually something that's old. And it might be fairly simple to describe how it would be done in a way that's efficient for the town staff and doesn't require particularly more resources. It just becomes a timing question about when a certain step in the process is done, or what's required of an applicant to meet, to come to us for something in a very conceptual format. So I want to make sure that it doesn't get described in a way that it seems like a daunting task or a big lift for the staff and for the council to get involved in. Now, the enforcement part, that's a different question. But I think on the conceptual review concept, that can be done in a fairly simple way. So we're not at the point yet, I don't think, where we've actually put this on the table as something for us to work up to take to council. But when that point happens, I hope you'll involve one of us in that process of putting that presentation together for the council. And of course, there are council members who have served many years on the ASCC as well. And so they'll have a pretty good understanding of what we're talking about, I believe.
Well, I think if I could just respond to that a little bit, I think it's important that we take the time to think through, what you're saying and what the ASCC is looking for, and think about how to really do that. And one of the things I often try to explain to people in my job is there's so many details. There's so many details, and if we do our jobs well, you never even thought about them. So if we're going to do an optional process, then we need to think through, how we publish that. We need to create different checklists. We need to create different procedures for how we're reviewing everything during COVID. So there is some work to do. And
Sure.
I do have, and I want to be straightforward with the ASCC. I want to make the process improvements that the council and the ASCC want to make. I mean, that is my role and my responsibility. But I am cautious, and I want us to be thoughtful about the amount of work that's in front of the planning and building department right now. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up. I mean, we're in the position right now that we are not able to process projects at the same pace that, we were able to before the pandemic. And this is a very big transition for us. And so I really do want to think about, our resources. And that's why I think that, we need to take these recommendations and take it to the mayor and chairs meeting and give us staff a chance to process it a little bit and think through what the potential implications can be so we can address those appropriately, right? And really understand the goals of the ASCC and figure out the best way to implement those goals and to fit it in with the overall work program. So, and I think To your other point, I think it's incredibly important that longstanding members of the ASCC be involved in this conversation. And so, you know, we can do it a couple of different ways. In this particular case, it might be a great idea to invite the chair and the vice chair to the meeting. So maybe we have the mayor and the vice mayor and the chair and the vice chair of ASCC, so that we get more kind of depth and experience as part of the conversation. I think that might be very helpful. So that would be a recommendation that I would make to make it as productive as a conversation as possible.
That's
And
great.
Laura, I can say, as having chaired the last year, I would appreciate it if you and I, you know, talked a lot more, you know, about what's out there, what you're seeing, what you guys are struggling with, how I can help you, how I could maybe get another ASCC member. Everybody's got their own style of working. So, you know, I used to work a lot more with Tom and Debbie. You know, they would just check in a lot more, where we just had more discussion. So I think it would be really helpful for me to chew things over with you every now and then, you know, about how we feel about a project. So anyway, that's just me, and maybe other people. I'm just not an architect, so I need some help with stuff sometimes.
And Dana, let me generalize your comment a little bit, which is, I think it's not so much that it's important for you to do that, but I think that a stronger or a broader communication pathway by whoever happens to be the chair.
Yes.
And the planning department. As we go into a new year with potentially either new or reinstated commission members, I think it would be worthwhile very early in the year to think about what kind of work plan we would like to see for the year. And not just that it need to be immediate and take effect immediately, but there are things that just require a long gestation period. Changes to the lighting ordinance took years between us complaining about the old lighting ordinance and to the point of actually getting new rules in place. So when I say put together a work plan, I'm just talking about things that we want to keep front and center.
Yes.
That we be reminded that we want to keep moving something forward. Things like enforcement, things like refining the review process to try to make it more efficient for everybody. And one of the things that I think would be useful would be on a periodic basis for the chair and the planning director or somebody on staff to take a look at the applications that are coming in or where contacts have been made with the planning department, not wait until it's agendized.
Yes, yes.
But just say, gee, we got 4 applications last week, or 4 first contacts, people wanting, letting us know about their plans coming up, and just sort of talking through that so that when the project comes up 8 months later for a single and final review, there's been some knowledge at the ASCC level about what's going on. And that might even be a process that would include a recommendation of, gee, maybe these are people it would be good to encourage to do a really early review. But if we
And
don't find out about it,
I have tried to do that a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you remember, Dana, but I did reach out to you about 138 Goya earlier in the process. And so I think for me, it's about understanding what ASCC wants to achieve, right? And how to facilitate that in a reasonable way that we can count on, that feels consistent to you. So.
Yeah, I want this to be guidance and helpful. And so we just need to start talking more, I think.
yeah. And I'm confident. I've had a few conversations with the town manager lately, and I'm confident that I feel it in my gut the town professional staff really wants to make this work in the best way possible. And so I'm looking forward to, you know, us getting into a slightly different pattern that I think will work better for us as commissioners and for applicants, and hopefully not add burden to the staff, but make the process in some ways easier.
Yes.
Well, and we just had an example. So the project you just heard tonight, I brought to you as a conceptual review.
Yes, exactly.
So Carter is, since
I
I've been here a
remember
little
that
over 2
as
years.
I started
Carter
looking
is,
at the agenda. I said,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we did that one as a very conceptual review.
yeah, Carter's the only one that's ever asked me to do that. And
Uh-huh.
if anyone else asked me to do that, I would have said yes. It is,
Right.
to be honest, it
Laura,
is harder. It is
Laura,
harder for us sometimes, you know, but
we used to get more of those. We did. And then we'd see them in, I don't know, somewhere between 3 to 9 months after then, you know, wherever they were in the process. And that was kind of neat. I did think it was efficient to see all these projects come to us and they're ready to go. But then all of a sudden you're thinking, wait a minute, all the aesthetic contributions that we can make and the neighbor and the community contributions we can make are kind of lost in that process.
Mhm.
I think we're going to have to reconcile what feels somewhat contradictory in that there's been support for one-time reviews of projects that are very clean and
Right.
straightforward. But then I also hear you saying you want a very different process for some other types of projects. So there is work here in thinking through what these different pathways are, because for due process, for legal reasons, and under the Housing Accountability Act, we really do need to have a clear process that's published and put on our website.
Yeah.
So that we can explain to people and it can be fair and transparent. And so there really is work here in figuring out what the different paths are and making sure that we're fair to everyone, whichever path they choose.
Right.
Polk Valley is a small community and I want it to remain a community. Meaning community voices are heard. And that's what I'm worried about, is that people say to me, well, what's going on here and what's going on there? I mean, I didn't even know about the fire department. I didn't know that. I was a little bit embarrassed. You know, I'm like, I don't know. So that kind of stuff, that's strange.
Okay, I guess we'll have to figure out how to do that, right? Because they did present to council in a very preliminary way. And so council was aware of it and they submitted to us and we've just been working on it, you know, because that's what we do. But it sounds like
I'm not being aggressive
you know,
in any way, shape, or form, or I just mean, let's kind of bring it back to our grassroots is what I'm hoping we can start with. And we kind of all grow projects together without causing a financial burden or a time constraint. Let's just bring it back through the roots.
All right.
so it sounds like a meeting of the
Move
mayor
on.
and the chairs, and we'll invite the vice chair as well. Sounds like the next best step.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
So where are we here? We're on committee reports, right? Does anyone have committee reports?
I do.
Okay.
Let's see, on October 6th, I reviewed a change to a driveway gate at 480 Westridge. And it was pretty straightforward. They moved the gate back from 40 feet to 55 feet from the property line and redesigned the gate a little bit, and it looked good. The opacity got a little better, different keypad. It was all fine. Just something that Carol asked me to look at, and it was very straightforward.
But it's still one of those houses where they have to back up, right? All the way to the street if they get in and the gate doesn't open.
Let me take a quick look.
That's Norman Chen's property. Anyway, I hope they have a place for someone to turn around instead of backing out onto Westridge.
Yeah, at least a little gravel, something.
I think they've got a little bit of a wide spot. Yeah, it is a long, narrow driveway though, yeah.
Okay, well, whatever. So that's done.
Yeah.
Did you do anything else, Al?
No, I didn't.
I looked at an ADU on the corner of Alpine and Paso del Arroyo, which is across from the Portola Valley Garage. And the issue with that is that they wanted to bring their front walkway out to Alpine Road, right where the sidewalk there is and through those redwoods. And I think it would have been problematic with a parking, number one. So I asked for them to bring it over to the Paso del Arroyo side. I also know that it's in the scenic corridor, and the scenic corridor kind of, the idea behind it is not to have a lot of ingress and egress into the scenic corridor. So did anything happen with that, Dylan?
The applicant responded and they would like to meet with you and the director to discuss the recommended changes that you made.
Okay,
So
okay.
I'm scheduling that Zoom meeting with all 4 of us to discuss. So it's still in the process in terms of those revisions.
It would also mean less path lighting, less landscaping, but you know, I think it'll result in having a parking on that sidewalk. And I just don't think it's I don't think that's acceptable. And I also don't want to see any ingress and egress into the scenic corridor. So that's all I did. Anybody else have a review?
Nothing from,
I don't have a review, but I have a question just for the broader community. Where are we supposed to take our styrofoam these days?
Huh?
Laura, do you know?
We're
Dylan?
just not able to offer that service of the special styrofoam pickup since our staff is not working at town hall.
You
So-
know, I think with all of us being, you know, sheltered in place, a little bit more relaxed now, but since March, I have a garage full.
it's really cool when it burns.
I know it's really
Bonfire.
hard. It's one of the special services that we offer in town, and it's not something we're able to do right now because we're not, you know, in the office able to staff it.
Well, clearly
Okay.
I've been buying too much wine. I'm being
Buy it in cardboard.
I wish you could just use that, right?
I wanted to raise something I saw on PV Connect. There's a building issue at 4536 Alpine Road. With somebody, it says building with concrete footings much larger than a shed. Do you know what's happening with that?
Where is that?
We've received complaints about it and we're investigating, and we anticipate sending a letter to the property owner.
Okay, because otherwise I've noticed parking things and things like that, but that was an actual building one, so I just wanted to ask. Do you have people for enforcement, Laura or Dylan, or are you completely sort of snowed under with planning applications?
Staffing code enforcement is a real challenge for us right now. Cheyenne's able to do a small amount of enforcement. You may be aware that our building official left at the beginning of the pandemic, so I've been acting as my own building official this whole time, and so that's presented some extra challenges. So we are still trying to work through how to get additional resources. One of the challenges with code enforcement is that there's no cost recovery. There's no way to get back the money that it takes to do code enforcement. So the council has expressed some interest in doing some broader outreach to the community around code enforcement in general. And so there was some work that we had been working on before the pandemic that we put on hold. And so Jeremy's leading that. So we may be picking that back up in order to kind of gauge the community's interest in how much code enforcement we're going to do. You're all aware the town's been very light touch when it comes to code enforcement in the past. We don't have a full code enforcement program the way that most cities do because we're so small and, you know, really based on neighbor communication. So we would need to kind of establish things like fees and fines and appeal body and things like that in order to really have a strong enforcement, kind of technical legal enforcement arm.
Right, because does that speak to the 199 Apache property? if there was a code enforcement on that one? Or is that
Yeah,
just?
so in that one, like for the lighting, for example, I can send my building inspector out to take a look at the lighting and take some pictures. Our planning staff is having very limited time out in the community because you may be aware that we did have a COVID exposure with one of our staff members that was out in the field, had an exposure on a construction site. And so we have been very cautious about this because we're so small, we're so thin. If any one of us gets sick, we'll lose, an entire function for our work.
I didn't know that.
Everyone
I didn't know
okay?
if anybody else did.
Yeah, everyone's okay. All the tests came back negative, but we did, have an exposure on a construction site.
Was that recently?
No,
Okay.
it was fairly early on, actually.
Right.
Well, one of the persistent problems over the years has been enforcement of lighting changes because they're really only visible at night. And typically staff isn't out working at night. So there have been a couple times when I've taken photos in my walks around the neighborhood and sent them in, but that's one of those things that's really difficult unless somebody gets tasked with coming out at 8 p.m.
So this is an example of why it's really important to align it with council priorities, right? And why we have that kind of procedure in place. So.
Right.
But code enforcement is one of their priorities this year, right? The discussion of code enforcement?
Yes, the discussion of it. Obviously, when we, created the original priorities, it was not in a pandemic environment. And so a lot of the priorities have shifted. Certainly for planning and building, we've kind of just doing the basics that we need to do and then the most important council priorities. So we probably need to get their feedback on some of these things.
And with the like the PB Connect app, people could take pictures of the lighting and send them in anonymously, and then they'd be looked at by the town, wouldn't they?
Yes, it's taken a while to get to those things, but yes, then they would be in the queue.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you.
All right, so let's move on to minutes. Does anyone have-
I'm sorry, I do have one brief staff report, just an update for everyone. We had a conversation about 29 Valley Oak, and there was a particular concern about the fascia, and it was the way the roof wrapped around. So we did send the inspector out, and there is a painted fascia board that is painted a dark color that was going over that exposed roofing material. So that fascia issue should be resolved.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you
good.
for following up.
That's Starkovich, right?
That's the
Next to
neighbor.
Starkovich.
That's Dennis
Gotcha.
is the neighbor, yeah.
Yeah, okay, goody.
Neighbor Rob.
Glad that resolved. Okay, so minutes?
They look good to me.
I didn't see anything.
No corrections for me.
Move to approve, anyone?
Sure,
Yeah,
I'll move to approve the minutes as written.
Second? All
I'll
those in
second.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I've got, for the
Okay, you
record, I've got Commissioner Sill, seconded by Dave Ross.
Okay, then I move to adjourn.
All
Good
right.
job, you
Great.
guys.
I love it.
Okay,
Miss
thanks a
Paul.
lot.
I
Good
miss
night.
you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Megan.
Bye.
Bye.